I found out an older man I was seeing when I was a teen still has nudes pictures of me. I ended up telling his wife, and now she's divorcing him and taking their child. AITAH in this situation. When I, 30F, was 16, I began seeing a much older man that I'll call David. I had been babysitting his son for him on and off since I was about 10 years old. When I became 16, he became flirtatious, complimenting me often, inviting me over in his hot tub, and buying me little things here and there. One night David invited me over to get into the hot tub and began offering me alcohol. One thing led to another, and we ended up sleeping together. Unfortunately, I had a terrible home life and childhood, and my parents couldn't have cared less where I was and what I was doing. He was 43 at the time. He basically moved me in to use me for babysitting, sex, and keeping his home clean. I was eager to please him and thought he actually cared about me, what a joke, and was happy to do anything he asked me to do. He'd try to make me feel good and manipulate me by telling me if I was just a bit older, he'd love to place a ring on my finger, that he was so lucky to have found such a good woman as me since they are a dying breed and things of that nature, and I'd eat it up like an idiot. He'd parade me around in skimpy outfits at get-togethers with his friends. At the time I thought David was proud to be with me, but looking back he just enjoyed me stroking his ego in front of his friends and showing them his young plaything. I was drinking just about every day with him, and he'd encourage me to drink so we'd have a good time. One day one of his friends, let's call him Michael, pulled me aside and told me he couldn't keep quiet about it any longer, but that David had quite a few pictures of me naked and passed out in his bed. When I asked him to show them to me, I noticed they were not all from the same night because my hair would be styled differently. The sheets had been changed and were different colors, etc. Apparently David had been sending them to his circle of friends, bragging, telling them about our sex life and the things he'd do to me when I was passed out, and had no idea he had been doing them. I was disturbed, but being naive and also not wanting to cause any issues, I let it go like an idiot. I stopped seeing him not long after and haven't seen him from that point on. It's been 14 years since then, and I'm happily married and in the most incredible loving relationship of 13 years with my husband. We have 2 children together whom I absolutely adore. David has tried to contact me a few times since I last saw him, telling me how much he'd love to see me, he misses me, etc. And I have mostly either ignored the messages, left him on read, and one of his profiles I ended up blocking because I am not big on confrontation. A few days ago, Michael reached out to me on social media. He wrote me and said that I had been brought up in a conversation. Michael told me David was going on and on about how he should have kept me around because I did housework for free without ever complaining, that I put out whenever he wanted me to, that I had a great body that hadn't been tainted by tons of other men, gross, and that I was a fun lay. Apparently there was more he said, but that was the gist of it. Then he said after all of this had been said, David made the comment that, "At least I still have those photos." Michael said he asked him what he meant, and he said something along the lines of, "Come on, man, you know what photos I'm talking about," and then began vulgarly explaining the photos of me in great detail, where I'm either splayed out, on my stomach, the close-ups he took, etc. Michael said he was shocked because he couldn't believe he still had them, and it's disgusting that he still had those photos of me, as I was under 18, and he also has a wife now, another child, and his oldest is older than the age I was in those photos. I don't feel like Michael is the good guy in this scenario, because even as an adult back then, I feel like he should have been so disgusted by what his friend was doing that he should have at the very least cut ties with him, but I did thank him for reaching out to me and letting me know. I ended up taking the next couple of days to process what he said. I'm not only shocked, but appalled that after all this time this man still has these photos of me. Devices and technology have changed so much in that time span, and I don't remember there being such a thing as Google Photos or the cloud. I could be wrong, of course, where his photos would have just been automatically saved, and he could access them on each new device he got back then. That tells me he took the time to upload these photos to each one he received until you could back up your gallery. That just makes my stomach churn. Not just that, but after all these years he's had these photos of me to use for whatever disgusting purpose when I was so sure they were gone after all this time. I was wrong. I told my husband and he was furious. Not necessarily at me, but at the situation. He has hated this man for so long due to him taking advantage of me at such a vulnerable time in my life and using me as he did for his own sick needs. He wanted to write him immediately, blast him on the internet, and ruin his career. While I agree with everything he's saying, I don't want anyone else knowing my business. It's embarrassing enough I was so young playing house with an older man, but that I was so careless and naive as well. I begged him to please let me handle it, and he finally agreed, but said I should at the very least let his wife know that he's a predator. I told him I wanted to write Daniel first and say my piece, but my husband said that that would give Daniel time to delete any evidence, try to spin some tale to his wife that I'm crazy, or he'd block me from her socials so that I couldn't contact her and tell her what he's done and still has in his possession. I'm glad I talked to my husband first because I was so full of emotion and seeing red that these thoughts hadn't crossed my mind. I ended up writing his wife night before last and basically told her everything. I told her that I used to babysit David's oldest when I was young, and he'd have me spend the night and pay me in the morning. That over time he became more and more inappropriate, and then one night he got me drunk and made a move on me in the hot tub. That for months I became his bangmaid, free childcare and anything else he wanted me to do. He'd parade me around in skimpy outfits for his friends when we went out, and when he'd throw his Super Bowl and other sports-related parties, he'd have me run around in what was essentially a revealing maid costume and bring everyone drinks, snacks, etc., while many of them would make derogatory comments to me. That he loved the attention he got from me being on his arm, and he'd get me really drunk and do things to me without my consent. He'd take naked photos of me while I was passed out in his bed, and not only that, but that he ended up sending them to his group of friends. He would also threaten that if I ever did anything he didn't like, that he'd throw me to the curb, knowing I had nowhere else to go. That's a story for another time. I also told her that it turns out he still has those photos either on his phone or computer somewhere. I didn't tell her Michael told me because he asked me not to, and although I don't feel like he deserves anonymity, I wouldn't know had he not told me. So I promised I wouldn't tell her, and if she didn't believe me, she could go look for them herself. There was a bit more said to her, but that's the majority of it. I was a nervous wreck sending that message, and even more so awaiting her response. I saw that she read it within a couple of hours, but after I didn't hear from her that night and yesterday morning, I thought that maybe she either chose to ignore what I was telling her, or she confronted him, and he lied to her about everything I was saying. That couldn't have been further from the truth. I don't know exactly what or how it happened, or if she even found the photos, but I do know she took their child and left and is telling David she's filing for divorce. I know this because I woke up to a very nasty, hateful message from David telling me I had no right to write his wife over something that happened so long ago, that I was a willing participant in everything we did together. I was a whore. Not sure if these type of words can be used here. How dare I blow up his marriage and his family, etc., and that it's my fault that his daughter was now going to grow up with a broken family, and that I've not only ruined his life, but hers too. Now I'm starting to feel really guilty about what I've done. If I would have kept my mouth shut and not wrote his wife, that she would have been none the wiser, and they wouldn't be potentially getting a divorce, and their daughter wouldn't be growing up without her parents together. I know he's a vile individual, and that he shouldn't necessarily be allowed to get away with everything he did, including still having those photos of me. But I'm wondering now if I should have just let it go. I didn't just hurt him, I hurt two innocent people in the process. AITAH in this situation,